They called me unstable, fired me, silenced me, all because I exposed the truth behind their miracle drug. But I didn't disappear, I evolved. Before you hear my story, tap subscribe and drop a comment if you've ever been silenced or underestimated. They say your life doesn't crumble all at once, it fractures quietly, like hairline cracks in glass. Invisible, harmless, until the whole damn thing shatters. Mine began with a number. Just one. It was week 19 of the Neurolinux trials, and I was hunched over a stack of raw data sheets in Lab 3A. My eyes had been swimming in columns for hours, but something snapped into sharp focus. Patient 0427's motor function score had inexplicably improved by 31%. But her logs showed tremors and instability. 2 hours of video footage confirmed it. Her hands shook like a leaf in a hurricane. I felt a strange weight drop in my stomach. That moment when instinct starts whispering before logic catches up. So, I pulled up the digital records. Cross-checked again. The score had been altered. I blinked hard, hoping I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong. But then I found another. And another. Same trial group. Same impossible improvements. Same forged stability scores. It wasn't human error. It was deliberate. Back then, I still believed in the system. In rules. In the sanctity of data. So I followed protocol. I reported the inconsistencies to the trial administrator, Dr. Sims, a pale, twitchy man who could barely look you in the eye. He nodded absently, fingers tapping against the edge of his tablet. "You should talk to Dr. Locke," he mumbled. And just like that, I was passed up the chain to the one person I least wanted to see. Dr. Vivian Locke wasn't just the face of Locke Pharmaceuticals, she was Locke Pharmaceuticals. Founder. CEO. Chief Medical Officer. She was the kind of woman you didn't just hear about, you studied. Her TED Talk had over 10 million views. Time had her on its cover under the headline, "The Mind Healer." She was brilliant, charismatic, and ruthlessly untouchable. Our meeting was in her corner office, glass walls, orchid on the desk, and that smell of antiseptic lavender. She wore a pristine white blouse and a silver pendant that swung like a scalpel as she leaned in to shake my hand. "Elias," she said, smiling, "you've been doing remarkable work." That smile, God, I still remember how perfectly it was rehearsed. I laid out the anomalies. Printed graphs. Data comparisons. Patient logs. She studied them in silence, nodding slowly. And then, in the calmest voice I'd ever heard, she said, "Do you know what the market cap of Neurolinux is projected to be by next quarter?" I blinked. 2.3 billion, she continued. "And that's conservative." "You're right, Elias, some numbers were adjusted. To maintain trial cohesion." My breath caught. "You're admitting this?" She tilted her head. "You're a scientist. I'm a CEO. Sometimes reality needs help aligning with the future." I felt my fingers tremble. "This is fraud." She poured water from a carafe into a glass and pushed it toward me like she was offering communion. "You're brilliant. But brilliance becomes dangerous when it forgets the bigger picture." My hand stayed in my lap. She leaned back, crossing her legs, her expression softening as if I were a child who just didn't understand. "I'm protecting lives. A few bad data points would delay the drug for years. Imagine how many people could suffer in that time. We're optimizing the process." "Optimizing?" I repeated. "You're manufacturing results." She stood. The smile faded. "Let me give you some advice, Elias," she said quietly. "People who scream about ethics don't get tenure. They get forgotten." I should have walked out. But part of me still believed there was a line she wouldn't cross. So I filed the report. Quietly. Through the company's anonymous ethics portal. It was detailed. Professional. I didn't mention Locke by name. But someone knew. Because 2 days later, my access badge stopped working. I came in early, 5:15 a.m., like always. Lab lights off. My thumbprint denied. Red light blinking. The receptionist looked up, startled. She made a phone call I wasn't meant to hear. Yeah. He's here. No one spoke to me directly. No confrontation. No meeting. Just shut out. By that afternoon I was suspended pending investigation for workplace hostility. I called my team. No one answered. I sent emails. No replies. The silence was deafening. By Friday, word had gotten out I'd been displaying concerning behavior. That I'd had an emotional breakdown in the lab. That I'd threatened staff. It was all a lie. But lies have gravity. I tried to fight back. I hired a lawyer. Sent statements. Filed appeals. Locke Pharma's legal team buried me in non-disclosure clauses, confidentiality breaches, and mental health insinuations. The ethics report I'd filed? Magically disappeared. The HR rep I'd spoken to? No longer with the company. Suddenly, I was the unstable one. The paranoid one. The whistleblower with a history of delusional episodes. I started getting calls from journalists, briefly. Then the story stopped. Silence again. I didn't know it then, but Locke had hired a crisis PR firm to handle me like a threat, not a man. They erased my credibility before I could defend it. The moment it truly broke me came weeks later. I'd submitted my resume to 6 university labs. 3 had responded positively, until, strangely, all 3 pulled out within days. One professor finally emailed me. Elias, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but your name raises red flags. I'm sorry. Red flags. My name, the only thing I owned, was now radioactive. I stayed in a small motel outside Baltimore. Room 204. Cheap carpet. Plastic curtains. I remember lying there at 3:47 a.m., staring at the ceiling fan spinning like a scalpel above my chest, and wondering how far a man could fall before he vanished entirely. I didn't want to die. But I didn't know how to keep living as Elias Crane. So I disappeared. There was one last moment, before the curtain dropped. I crashed a conference panel in D.C., a Locke-sponsored symposium on neurological ethics. I had shaved, dressed in my old lab coat, stood in line for the mic. When they called on me, my hands shook. I have proof Neuralinex data was fabricated, I said, voice cracking. I worked on the trials. You're pushing a drug based on fraud. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Security moved fast. I was dragged out mid-sentence, my mouth still open. That night, the media ran one story. Not about the data. About me. Troubled researcher interrupts panel. Former colleagues cite mental health concerns. I saw the photo they used. I looked unhinged. Disheveled. Broken. They got what they wanted. That was the death of Elias Crane. But here's what they never understood about scientists. We don't fear the dark. We study it. And over time, in silence, we learn how to weaponize it. I left the country within a week. Burned my SIM card. Liquidated my savings. Changed everything but my fingerprints. For a year, I lived in liminal places, hostels, labs, black market biotech meetups, trading code and consulting for food. And slowly, piece by piece, I built something new. A name. A shell company. A plan. Because Locke hadn't just destroyed my reputation, she'd taken my identity. And the only thing left to do now was take hers. 7 years is long enough to make a ghost out of a man, long enough for scars to fade into silence, and for the world to forget the sound of your name. But I never forgot mine. I kept it hidden, buried under passports and forged degrees, a secret stored in the folds of my new identity, Adrian Vale. Adrian Vale had no history. No scars. No trail of burned bridges. Just a quiet British accent I learned from months spent shadowing expat scientists in Singapore, and a fabricated CV that placed me in every lab the Real Elias Crane had been blacklisted from. The first step wasn't revenge. It was survival. I took contract work in neuroinformatics, small projects, obscure companies. Each job a stone, building the path back to the tower that had once exiled me. I learned what Locke Pharma feared most: independent biotech firms, especially ones with government partnerships. Their vulnerability wasn't scientific. It was financial. 3 years into my exile, I founded a shell company, Veritas Sin. On paper, it was a quiet little neuroresearch firm out of Luxembourg. In practice, it was a scalpel. Every patent I filed, every compound I discovered, was meant to carve away at Locke Pharma's market share. They didn't even notice at first. But slowly, Veritasin began eating into their pipeline. First with a sleep regulation protein that undercut one of their insomnia drugs. Then a synthetic enzyme that rendered their pain modulator obsolete. Investors took note. I watched Locke Pharma's stock price twitch. That's when I knew they were bleeding. And I wasn't done. Through an alias, I began acquiring Locke Pharma stock, tiny increments, layered through foreign entities. By the time I owned 2.3%, I was invited to their investor call as a valued shareholder. I didn't speak. I just listened. Vivian Locke still ran the calls herself. Same silky voice. Same theatrical pauses. But her smile was thinner now. Tighter. They were over-leveraged. Struggling to mask quarterly losses. Desperate for their next miracle drug. That's when I gave them one. Veritasin offered a licensing deal. A revolutionary protein compound for early-onset Alzheimer's. Untraceable back to me. The contract came with exclusive manufacturing rights, and a single hidden clause: any breach would void all patent protections and trigger a media release of internal trial data. They signed it within a week. And just like that, I was inside the vault. Not as Elias. As Adrian. I infiltrated their boardroom under the name of an external innovation partner. My suit was custom-tailored, my glasses rimless, my accent flawless. No one recognized me. But I recognized all of them. Dr. Sims. Still twitchy. Chief Strategy Officer Marla Torres. Now bloated with arrogance and too much Botox. And Vivian Locke, still sleek, still silver, still smug. I smiled at her. She smiled back. She didn't know she was shaking hands with the ghost of the man she destroyed. Over the next 6 months, I embedded myself deeper. Sat in their clinical roundtables. Reviewed their research proposals. Offered polite critiques. All while laying the traps. Anonymous tips began leaking to regulatory bodies. Fabricated, but plausible, data inconsistencies surfaced in Locke's early trials. Old whistleblower reports mysteriously resurfaced online. Blogs picked it up. Then media. Then the feds. Vivian tried to control the narrative. She failed. And still, she had no idea that the man responsible for her unraveling was watching her flounder from across the boardroom table. Rough quarter, I said once, sipping tea during an executive retreat. She laughed bitterly. Too many eyes on us. It's like someone wants us to implode. I raised a brow. How curious. Her eyes flicked toward me. Suspicion? Maybe. But it passed. Because Adrian Vale was no one. And Elias Crane was dead. Until the moment I decided to resurrect him. Vivian Locke sat alone on the stage. What was left of her composure clung to the edges of her jawline, but even that was starting to crack. Cameras flashed like gunfire. Sweat clung to her temple. Behind her, The Locke Pharmaceuticals logo flickered under failing LED lights, the perfect metaphor. Her voice, once the commanding center of every shareholder meeting, wavered like a bad signal. We take these allegations seriously." The words barely reached the back of the press room. And I watched from the second row. Not as Adrian Vale. Not as Elias Crane. Just as the man who broke her. It began with a single anonymous document, an internal memo from 7 years ago, confirming deliberate data manipulation in the Neuralinex trials. Sent to every major news outlet. Accompanied by hundreds of files. Patient records. Lab notes. Altered spreadsheets. Video footage. Everything she tried to erase. Everything I had rebuilt. Within 24 hours, the internet was ablaze. Hashtags. Reddit threads. Old employees speaking out, emboldened. Class action suits filed. Former patients coming forward. I released the report through a whistleblower organization. Untraceable. Impeccably timed. Then came the audits. Then came the raids. And finally, the resignations. The board fractured. Stock plunged. 3 partner companies terminated contracts. The FDA suspended all Locke Pharma trials pending investigation. The walls closed in faster than I expected. Vivian held on longer than anyone else. She launched lawsuits. Made public statements. Called it a smear campaign. She even hinted that I was behind it. But she never said my name. Because she didn't know who I was anymore. The final strike came on the anniversary of the Neuralinex approval. I walked into the same auditorium where I had been dragged out years ago. This time, I held a press badge. No one stopped me. As Vivian took the stage, I raised my hand. She hesitated. Her eyes locked onto mine. Somewhere in that glance, something clicked. A fragment of recognition. I smiled. "Dr. Locke," I asked, my voice steady and low, "can you confirm whether the Neuralinex data presented in 2020 was falsified under your directive?" Gasps. Silence. Every camera turned. Vivian froze. And in that moment she knew. Knew exactly who I was. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stood there, the woman who stole my name, my career, my dignity, speechless. The headline the next morning read, "Locke Pharmaceuticals implodes amid data scandal. CEO steps down after whistleblower bombshell." But I didn't need the byline. I walked away from the chaos I had orchestrated, coat collar raised against the cold. No one followed. No one knew my name. Not anymore. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause. Sometimes it's the quietest man in the room who holds the loudest truth. And mine had finally been heard. Vivian Locke would never be remembered as the mind healer. She would be remembered as the architect of her own downfall. And I, the ghost she created, had made sure her legacy was nothing but ash. Tell me below, have you ever turned pain into purpose? If you felt that revenge burn slow and cold, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more real-life revenge stories. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being part of this healing. Until next time, stay steady, stay kind.